Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess listeners. We've got a return guest who I'm excited to welcome back momentarily. We're going to be doing a chess improvement Q&A. We've got a bunch of great questions from the online community. I think it will be informative and entertaining as always. But first, I did want to give a couple announcements. Number one, people keep asking me, where is my audiobook? And it's a very good question. So I just wanted to mention this because I keep forgetting to mention it on the pod. So number one, I apologize that the audiobook is not still out, both with my publisher, New in Chess, and with myself. This is our first experience with an audiobook. We turned it into Amazon months ago, and frankly, I just didn't know that it took this long. And the bad news is I still don't have a concrete date for when it's coming out. I mean, it really shouldn't be long. Like in theory, it could even be out. We're recording this on March 8th. This will be out around 12 days later. It could be out by the time this comes out, for all I know. But anyway, communication has been minimal with Amazon, and unfortunately, I just don't have a firm date. But I really appreciate those of you who are hanging in there with it. And once the audiobook is out, obviously, that's plenty of chess content that you can return to over a lifetime. So thank you for your patience, and my apologies once again. Number two, someone mentioned to me I don't mention my newsletter, the Perpetual Chess link, fast enough. So consider this a reminder that it's a free weekly summary of all the chess articles that I've come across that you can subscribe to have delivered to your email. You also, of course, should subscribe to our guests blog, who I will be introducing at long last in 1 second. Last thing I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, chessable.com. Tons of new courses. The latest include an intro to chess calculation by candidate master Hazel Chua. His last course on calculation was one of the most popular and well-reviewed in recent years. And a friend of the pod, Grandmaster Ganguly, has a new lifetime repertoire out on flank openings. Obviously, Ganguly, former second to Viswanathan Anand, knows his openings inside and out, and I have enjoyed his courses in the past. So for our guest, again, return guest, always popular. He's the 2019 Swiss national champion. He's turned into a popular chess trainer and blogger and video creator. Last time he was on, he had done a sort of how to study chess deep dive. You guys can go and listen to that interview. I still recommend that one. And he's out with a new video, which is targeted more towards beginners, called Beginner Chess Mastery. So we'll be discussing our guest's new video, as well as answering, again, tons of really provocative questions about chess improvement. So without further ado, I am excited to welcome back to the pod Grandmaster Noel Studer. Welcome, Noel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to catch up. It's been a while. I know you've been in the lab finishing up this course. So we're recording 2 weeks before it comes out. Are you done?
I am officially done. Yep. I'm just editing 2-3 videos. I usually like to record in one full swing a video, but I have to edit 2-3 of them, and then everything will be completely 100% done.
Okay, great. So you switch from creating to marketing, as we're doing here.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot of work, actually. Self-publishing is kind of interesting, but I'll get there. You know, when I push myself, I say 19th of March, it's out. I put the gun on my head. I have to do it, right? It's just, it has to be done by then.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I need deadlines in order to get anything done, and that's why I'm in the crunch time working on a chessable course of my own. And yeah, it was moving slowly until I had some firm deadlines. But anyway, so we'll return to your course in due time. But it's been a while since I've done a chess improvement Q&A, and there's no one better, Noel, to answer questions from the community. So if you're up for it, I thought we would dive right in.
Let's do it. Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I wanted to start with something that's been kind of in hot discussion in chess Twitter in particular in recent days. So for context, a friend of the pod, friend of both you and I, Nate Solon, recently tweeted, he says, and this is a quote, "It's always interesting to me when our intuitions about chess differ from intuitions about sports. A lot of people have intuition that all things being equal, it would be best to have a grandmaster coach. But imagine I want to get better at tennis and I have the option to be coached by either Novak Djokovic or a local pro who has a ton of experience and skill coaching players my level. Nate says, well, I'd love to beat Djokovic. That would be awesome. But if my only goal is to get better at tennis, I'd probably bet on the local pro helping me more, unquote. So this caused a lot of reactions about people like Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard, Grandmaster David Smerdon were weighing in. Opinions kind of ran the gamut. So question from International Master Michael Rahal, shout out to Michael. He writes, there's a debate on whether a GM or a 1600 can teach an 800 beginner better or worse. What is your take on this topic? Tell us about your approach to these levels, and why do you think you might be able to do a better job than a 1600 coach, if you think that? So the floor is yours, Noel.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have to say that I'm trying to limit my Twitter intake, so I haven't seen the actual discussion. So maybe those are some points that have been said already, but I've thought about this a little bit. So I would say, first of all, I want to say that the analogy, I don't really think it works fully, because saying local pro and Djokovic is like 1600 and the GM, I don't think that's where we are. Like, I think local pro and Djokovic is something like an IM and Magnus Carlsen, right? So yeah, we have like this kind of idea that the most talented, most genius players in the world aren't the best coaches, I think is quite clear to most. So I would say it's lovely to talk with Magnus about your chess, but if you're, even like for me, it starts to become interesting. But if you're an amateur, Magnus doesn't understand how hard some stuff is because he's just so talented, it comes so natural to him. So I just wanted to say that I would say, if you want to use the analogy, I would say it's a 1600 player would be the guy in the tennis club that has played for 2-3 years and is showing you how he has improved in these 2-3 years, right? It's not a professional coach. He's just, just likes to play a little bit and will be the coach. So that's like one thing I wanted to mention for people to understand that, yeah, a local pro is actually an IM level, or somebody like top 1000 in tennis is actually like usually making a living teaching, I think, still. So you can earn a lot of money, but if you're not amazing, then you're still a coach probably. And then, yeah, so when we think about coaches, I would say a coach has to do two things, mainly. Understand what the student should learn and being able to help the student to learn it, right? That's basically the two main things a coach has to do. And I think a grandmaster has a big advantage to understand what a student should learn to a certain amount, because you have so much knowledge that you know where would be ideal to be at some point. While a weaker player maybe is closer to the level, but sometimes what happens is, let's say the weaker player would tell you something about strategy, but it turns out that this 1600 player doesn't know that what he's talking about on 1800 level doesn't work anymore. So it's actually not giving sound strategic advice if you want to outgrow your coach. That can be a risk sometimes. So that's like one of the risks I see with lower rated players. With the Grandmaster, the risk is that you just forget what beginners actually should learn, right? And you're just thinking like, yeah, whatever, I just fork this guy. And it's like, what is a fork? Please explain. So that could be a difference as well. I'm just checking. I have some notes on it. Yeah, so I think it's hard to say just based on rating who is the better coach. I think it's one of the puzzles, but it's not like, I don't know, every 1600 is a better coach to a beginner than every grandmaster, or the other way around. It's just one of the puzzles. And I would say that part of the question was, why do I think I would be better than a 1600? I think I'm better than the average person, and I'm successful as a coach and blogger because I really try to obsess about my student and try to understand what they need exactly, and then to provide them with what they need. So with the beginner course, for example, I started teaching one-on-one with beginners, and I started recommending stuff And I asked, do you understand this? And some people said, no, I don't get that. I said, okay, I have to like adjust that. So I think at the end of the day, a good coach is really somebody that tries to understand what the student needs and has like a firm knowledge of where the student needs to go. So you can explain the chess strategy in a way. But yeah, it's more about like your willingness to learn and your willingness to be able to be a good coach to your student than if you have 1600 or 1800 or 2000 or be a GM. But all things being equal, I would definitely prefer the GM.
Yeah. I'll offer my perspective as well, Noah. Number one, so what Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard, who obviously is one of the top trainers and authors in the world, he's got some gravitas in this area. He tweeted, I entirely agree with this sentiment. The best combination is a grandmaster with lots of training experience. And that I agree with that too. It's the best of both worlds. And from my experience, having been a teacher of players up to 17, as a 2100 player, having been a teacher of players up to the 1700, 1800 level, and having been a student of grandmasters and international masters, my experience is, if we're talking like below the 1100 level, I feel reasonably confident that I can offer at least 90% as much as like a top grandmaster trainer. But the higher the level goes from there, I think the value proposition changes. And, in getting a chance to, when I was taking lessons from Grandmaster Axel Bachmann, like his well of knowledge is just so much deeper than mine. And he sees things so much faster that I think if you're like a 1700 or 1800 player, I might have some knowledge about chess facts that some grandmasters don't have, but in terms of chess skill, they're just bringing a lot more to the table. So I think that there's sort of a sliding scale that comes in between like 1,000 to 1,500, something like that. And the other thing is, a lot of it comes down to what you're trying to get out of your chess lessons. And I certainly feel like I and other trainers can offer plenty of benefit to students, but and there's like a lot of people in Nate's replies were discussing the costs, because you can also like we shouldn't be grading things equally. If you're on a limited budget and say Jakob Aagaard will do it for $200 an hour, but then you have someone who's going to give you 70% of the quality for $30 an hour, like maybe that's okay. So there's a lot of degrees and follow-up questions one could ask myself, but the main sentiment I want to get across is agreeing with Jakob Aagaard. If you can find a grandmaster or strong IM who's got extensive teaching experience, it's hard to go wrong in that way.
Add to it teaching experience for that level. I think that's super important, right? Because there are actually like nearly every coach, in my opinion, should try to have a section where they really are really great. I've just actually seen a tweet of Jakob Aagaard, and he talked about his relationship. He worked with Nordic, and he said he resigned because he said he is amazing at 2650 to 2750 level, but there are better coaches to win the candidates and become a world champion. And I love that, because it just shows you have an awareness of like, I know I might be top 5 and in my opinion, Jakob is top 5 in the world for that category for sure. He will be great and very good for nearly every chess player, but he will be absolutely amazing for just this like specific rating range. And I think that this is important to understand, that now somebody listening and saying, oh, Jakob is top 5, well, it doesn't mean that for your level, for your exact needs, it's top 5. For example, I had this experience with Josif Dorfman. Amazing coach. I loved working with Josif. But Josif worked with Kasparov, and he brought Etienne Bacrot to 2700. So the problem with Josif was, if at some point I wouldn't understand something instantly, he had a hard time to understand that, because everybody he worked with for the past 20 years basically instantly just got it. You just tell him something and he gets it, and you tell him something and he gets it. And so that just shows that it depends on the person, on how fast you grow, how much you put time in. And in general, if you find a coach that says, I can coach everybody, I would be skeptical, because I prefer people that say, okay, I can coach everybody, but I'm really amazing at this, like for this kind of person. So if a 1600 player, going back to Nate's tweet, says like, I want to be the best possible beginner coach, and really tries to read a couple dozen of books about beginner chess, maybe even takes lessons from grandmasters, from stronger players on how they teach beginners, tries to study it and then does a bunch of that, that person will be way better coached than nearly any grandmaster for the beginner level, just for the fact that he has so much experience and knowledge on that specific rating range.
One other final thought I wanted to add is that for a lot of adult amateur players, in my experience, when you hire a coach, it's partly almost equal parts like sports psychologist as well as coach. I've noticed that a lot. Sometimes I feel that way, even in addressing my own shortcomings. So much of it comes down to like the psychology of time management or recovering from defeats. And also, like, as I've written about in my book, like, chess can be so lonely that just to have someone that you can walk through the struggle with, of like, these are the emotions I'm experiencing as I work hard to try to improve my results. And in that regard, I also think that you don't necessarily need a grandmaster if it's, if you feel like you're a strong enough player where you can extract information from the engines, or maybe you're getting feedback from friends, but you have a coach who you feel like really walks you through the emotional ups and downs and reassures you when necessary, and gives guidance on psychological adjustments and stuff like that. I feel that can be useful as well. So it ends up being a personal question, but as you say, Noel, if a grandmaster has done the work and is well-rounded, they're tough to beat. In terms, again, if you're not, if you're ignoring cost, which is certainly a factor,
absolutely,
as well. Okay, next set of questions from Patreon supporter Chris Wainscott. Thanks for helping to support the pod, as always, Chris. He's been there for like 6 years now. So shout out to Chris. And he asked, how do you diagnose what a student's needs are, and how do you construct a training plan to meet those needs?
Yeah, that's a good one. So usually when I very infrequently take students. So when I do, I have a hard sign-up process. So people have to already go through some steps to actually even just talk to me. So they need to be able to see their own view of what they need. So I want their idea of what they need. And then I look at their games. And this tells me already a lot, because sometimes, as you say, problems are psychological. So we might face a situation where the student thinks they need something, but if I look at their games, I'm like, you don't need that at all. Like, I don't see why you should study endgames, right? So then it's probably something more, even just to start to say, what is your weakness and how should you work on that? While sometimes we will agree on the thing, and then it's way more just, how do we work on that weakness? And then usually I have this 1/3 rule, which is just a rough idea of spend 33% of your time on training, playing and analyzing, 33% on tactics, and 33% on either opening, end games, or strategy. And I will adjust that, not too strongly, but I will adjust it with the problems I see, depending also on how big the problem is. So a very simple problem would be, okay, I have a new student, is a complete beginner, and he gets checkmated all the time with Scholar's Checkmate, right? Every training we do, it basically doesn't, like, his whole playing games doesn't make sense until we solve that problem. There's no learning in just saying, okay, let's look at the fork if he still gets the Scholar's Checkmated all the time. So that will have super high priority, and we need to work on it ASAP. And basically for a while, nearly 100% of the training needs to be this if the problem is that big. But for most problems, it will be just like one part of your training will be a little bit more. So if you tend to blunder more often tactically, you increase the tactic a little bit. But it's not like I'm saying you just do tactics until we solve that problem, and then we just do something else until you solve that problem. So I try to still have a well-rounded training plan, but have like these little bits of what is the weakness, how can we improve it.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. And Chris actually asked a follow-up question that follows up on what you just said. So in the Scholars Mate example, obviously it's fairly concrete to measure, like, okay, they're not losing to the Scholars Mate anymore. But obviously, as you start to work with more advanced players, it can be a little tougher to tell when a weakness is no longer a weakness. So Chris also asked how you decide that enough progress has been made and it's time to move on to the next weakness.
Yeah, usually I want to work on the thing, right, on the lowest hanging fruit. That means the thing that is the simplest to change and makes the biggest improvement in results, right? So usually blunders, hanging pieces, all these things, you can quite concretely work on them. And additionally, they just lose you a whole game. So when you change it, then you get better results. And in general, it is when the problem is not the lowest hanging fruit anymore that I try to switch it out.
So, that makes sense. So what do you advise for people who are struggling with hanging pieces and sort of big blunders?
Yeah, I would think like try to figure it out for yourself. That's the nice thing of having a coach. I'll try to do that for you if you're my student. But if you're alone, try to figure out what is the reason behind your blunders, right? Is it because you focus badly? That can be, right? Many people play distracted and then blunders happen. That's something that can, and that needs a different solution than, let's say, you don't even know what a fork is, right? You just started playing chess, you don't know. So is it the knowledge part? That would be, you don't have the motives. Is it the skill part? Which would be, you can see it if you play it online. Like if you just have a puzzle in front of you, you see it. But when you play a game, you can't find it, right? Then there's somewhere a skill gap. You can do it calmly, but in the game, you can't do that. I would then advise to train more sort of puzzles where you don't know what's happening. You can also train positions where you don't know if a positional move or a tactic is the best move, which helps you go, use just your brain as you would in a game. You can also work on your thought process. So one very simple advice to hanging pieces is before you make a move, every single time, be it in training and during the game, you ask yourself, if I make this move and you see it in your mind where this piece is going, can my opponent capture something? Just super simple. And this question alone can solve a lot of your blundering issues already. So you try to do this. And then the focusing issue would be something like, how can I make sure that I play when I'm fresh? How can I stop playing from my phone on the train ride when I talk to 3 colleagues and I have, music and a podcast in my ears and so on. So it can be different issues, but the most important thing is like understanding the issue first, right? And then the second is like, how can I solve this specific issue, what my problem actually is?
Yeah, well said. I've noticed that a lot of people's blunders come down to just sort of moments of impetuousness. It might just be like 90% of the time they have a routine that they follow, but they have this 10% that they have a very hard time getting rid of. And that gets back to what we were discussing earlier about like the value of a sports psychologist. A coach can point out that this is the problem, but often it's deeper than just awareness. It's behavior change is obviously quite challenging, but that was some very helpful advice. Thank you. So the next batch of questions, Noel, is all under the broad umbrella of addressing weaknesses. The questions, I think, they're about people's individual problems that they've encountered, but I think that they'll be pretty relatable for listeners. So the next one is from Chris Moore, who is a Patreon sub. Thanks for helping to support Perpetual Chess. Chris, he says, hi, Noel. I've been playing chess for 2.5 years. My Lichess classical rating is currently 1659. I find that my performance in classical 45-15 matches is disproportionately high compared to, say, 15-10 rapid. I think a lot of this has to do with the speed I can calculate. Given enough time, I feel I can calculate and thus play reasonably well. Could you share any strategies or exercises that would help enhance my calculation speed thereby improving my performance in rapid chess?
Yeah, I can. So in general, when you think about time controls, you want to make your training similar to the time control you want to excel. So I assume if you are good in 45 plus 10, that your training will be rather slow paced. You will have a lot of time to solve positions if you solve positions, and you will, never be in a big time rush in general to make decisions, which is the typical way of like doing classical game also training, right? So when I trained classical game training, I could have positions where I would think for 15 to 30 minutes on one single position, because I know during a game, I will probably have that time. But when you're thinking about a rapid game, you want to train quicker decision making. So that's just one part of the puzzle, is really just if you realize that you aren't as quick, then probably you aren't training often enough to be quicker. Then there is the big question of why do you even want to excel at 15 plus 10, right? You could just say 45 plus 10 is also fine. So just to question what is your priority. But if 15 plus 10 is a priority, I would recommend trying to make the exercises you solve in general probably a little bit simpler, but give you limited time. And then I would also look at the time usage of those games and really understand, am I using too much time just on every single move, so on every single decision, which would indicate that you're not playing logical moves quickly enough, which I would try to solve with studying some principles, some general ideas, trusting your intuition. So like in the opening, when you just see a good developing move that doesn't do anything bad and doesn't lose, just play it. Don't think 3 minutes about it, but think 15 seconds about it. Or that if it's the problem of calculation, and then you need to try to get quicker in training to spot those simple tactics, because the shorter the time control, the simpler the mistakes will be. The longer the time control, the more into the nuances we can go.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think a lot of working adult chess players, and I definitely put myself in this category, they struggle with a sort of fundamental tension between they might know that they're better at longer games, but their longer games are often much harder to get to. Like you can play a rapid, you can get 3 games in a night, or if you're doing online training and able to take it seriously, it's kind of easy to schedule someone for a 15-minute game. But if you're spending a lot of time, it can be harder, both from a work family perspective and just from finding a way to play perspective. So I think there is that sort of push and pull. And I've personally come down to what you were saying about like, why are you playing 15-minute? Like, for me right now, I try not to play the faster time controls if I can help it.
Yeah.
Except Blitz online.
Or you can like think about it in a way of, do I want the 15 plus 10 to be a training ground for the 45-minute games? Or do I really want to have good results? Again, that's a different situation for you, right? If you want to have it as a training ground, then maybe you don't care as much if you end up in time trouble and then blunder. As long as you've trained your opening and you've got something out of the game. While if you want to play, get good results, then obviously getting into time trouble and blundering in most games is actually horrible. So that's why it's always so important. You can't just read on the internet, it's best for XYZ to do XYZ. It just doesn't work. It never works. Every human is different. So like, okay, we can say sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. That should be good for you, right? But the deeper you go, the harder it gets. And with such specific advice, it's really important to know for yourself, what do I want to even achieve? Like, what is my motivation? And then you understand which way you want to go.
Well said. All right, next question is from Christopher Herrera, Milkman on Twitter. And he asks, is it enough to practice tactics using tactics trainers to improve your tactics, or do you have to actually play and train yourself to see the tactics in OTB online games? You hear professionals say all the time that OTB improves it much faster than online. Why do you think if this is so?
So OTB then online would be, right, just the difference of classical games against blitz games, or how do you understand that question? Because it could be meaning a lot of different things.
Yeah, I take it to mean he's differentiating getting better at tactics from playing serious games, whether they be OTB or online, versus solving as an exercise.
Okay. So I have a general idea of how you can get better at tactics. I call it the 5 steps to mastery. Step number 1 is learning the tactical motive, right? You need to know what a fork is to even find it. Step number 2 is to solve it. That's, I think, what he is referring to. You just have a tactics trainer and you click on fork. For example, on Lead Chess, you can just go do it. I think on chess.com should work as well. You just click on a specific motive and you train that motive. So you know there will be a fork. Can I find it? Step number 3 will be you go to a tactics trainer, but you don't know which motive it is, and you try to find it. It's a little bit harder. It's always getting harder. And step number 4, and that's the step that nearly everybody misses, would be you solve a position where you don't know if there is actually a tactic. So you're sitting down. There's, for example, a book, I think it's called 600 Practical Chess Exercises. That might be
by Ray Chang.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can have books, or you can. There are different ways. We can talk about the ways later if you want of doing that. But it's very important that you have that in your training, that you're using your brain to solve a position, but it doesn't mean that you just immediately find a win. Because you don't have that information during the game. You never have that information during the game. And then the last step will be you will now be ready to use it during your game. Obviously, you can do it from just, oh, I know the fork and now somehow I found it during the game. That can work. But the real way of doing it would be going through all the 5 steps. And what I realize is many students, people, readers, they are missing step 4 nearly 100% of the time.
That's very well thought out answer. Yeah. And this is something I also touched on in my book. And I think it's different for different people. I do think there's certainly people who are just training online and manage to improve their tactics a lot. But for the people who do find the competitive games are better, the reasons to me have some combination of the ability to sort of channel a deeper focus. And the fact that it's sort of, which ties into the other half to me, which is it's sort of a differentiated experience, which might make any lessons that you learn a bit more memorable. So for me, and I've mentioned this before, and I'm not saying that this makes me like a paragon of virtue, kind of the opposite, but I have a hard time setting up circumstances where I can solve rigorously at home. I have a hard time finding the motivation. But when I play over the board, I'm very focused and I work very hard and I really enjoy it. And if I were more dedicated to improving, I would do both, but if I'm only going to do one, for me, playing over the board, I consider it to be a higher ROI activity.
That's a very good point, actually. Yeah, that is a very valid point, that once you sit down and it counts, it's way easier to actually use all the brain power you have, because especially for some people, now the younger generation, it's fun that I'm saying the younger generation, but I feel old from that sense already, because
how old are you?
27.
Oh man, must be nice.
So I have a hard time focusing when I'm on a screen. And as I've always been focusing on OTB classical chess, I did 80-90% of my training with a real board, because my brain just refuses to work properly when it looks at the screen, basically. Yeah. So that's also something you can find out for yourself. Like, is it a problem that you actually just try and error online, for example? That's just so tempting. When you have online exercises, right? You just see one move that looks nice and you just start doing it. That doesn't have the same effect as if you really sit down, you think everything through, you write down your solution, and now you have the solution. Okay, now let's check if that was the right solution. So the approach is also different. And as you've said, Ben, is if you play OTB chess, you're forced to the right approach, basically, right? You can't just make a move and let's see what happens. at least it will be very painful, and that will be a good lesson for you later on.
Yeah. And a final thought is that, you'll read generic advice, but everyone's different. So if you are doing online training and you feel like your tactics are improving, then I don't think you necessarily have to change that because someone told you to. It's more like when you start to struggle, that might be something you want to look at that point. Okay, next up from Barry Hyman, who says, I'm roughly 2150 Blitz and 2100 Rapid on chess.com and struggle to get any higher than that. Would hiring a chess coach be more beneficial for me than online training courses?
Yes. As we've talked about, some chess coaches are amazing, some aren't. Some grandmasters are amazing coaches, some lower rated players are amazing coaches. But if you have a good coach, that coach will be able to give you much more specific advice and to understand your problems in a much deeper way than you get through online training courses. Online training courses are great because, for example, I charge quite a lot for training, so a lot of people can't afford it to train with me, and I have a limited amount of time, so I'm trying to get, to do more courses so more people can have a similar feeling of what coaching would be. But for a singular person, if you say money is not an issue for me, or I have the finances to get a coach, then getting a coach is the single best way you can improve a skill. Absolutely.
Yeah, I strongly agree, especially because he mentioned that he's stuck. So again, if he felt like, well, what I'm doing is working, then okay, maybe you can put it off for a little while. But when you're stuck, again, quoting Peter Giannato says I do in my book, the number one principle is to change something. Obviously what you're doing isn't working, so you go down the list and find something to change. And yeah, I would definitely put a coach at the top of the list. Okay, this next question actually gets to something I mentioned earlier. So this is from Chad Clark in the Perpetual Chess Facebook group, which is another way you all can interact with the online chess community. Chad asks, he says, I often find myself in a position where I make a move and immediately recognize why it was a bad decision. As I play more, I do find that gap getting smaller. But do you have any advice for helping future me communicate more effectively with me in the present?
Yeah, I love that question. Actually, I've touched on that already, which is the blunder check. So what I really, and I'm recommending that because I've done that throughout my whole career. So I have worked for 7 years with a sports psychologist, and I've told him exactly that problem. Sometimes I'll make a move, and once you hit the clock, you're like, oh my God, why am I so dumb? Like this happens to grandmasters, right? And it's somehow a blind spot that you're just caught in stuff. And sometimes it also happens that you go to a toilet and you just come back to the board and you just see stuff and you're like, what? Like, why is this? So we need ways of tricking our brain in that way. And he told me, when you play, what are you allowed to write down? So in OTB, you can write down times and you can write down your moves. So what I did for 5-6 years of my chess career is when my opponent made a move, I wrote down their move, but not their time. Now I'm thinking about my move, and it's not legal, and I want to say this very clearly, you shouldn't write down your own move that you're planning to play. That is not legal. But as of when I played, it was legal to write down the time of your opponent. So what you're doing is you're thinking about your move. This is OTB, and then you can try it in Blitz several ways. When you're thinking about your move and you're saying, okay, I want to play knight to g5. What you're doing now is you're writing down the time of your opponent, but this is just a filler because you're telling yourself, I'm playing knight g5. Now you look back on the board and you think knight is on g5. Am I blundering something? And now you can basically communicate with your future you. You see it in your brain as if the knight is standing on g5. You'll realize, oh my God, that my rook on a1 is just hanging. What the heck am I doing? Or you'll realize it's fine. When it's fine, you can play the move. So that was my blunder check when I played over the board chess. And it worked extremely well for me because it really became a habit. If you see my score sheets, just there was always the time of my opponent, basically. So when I did it well, I had a very good blunder check.
Wow.
For online games, you'll need to be a bit more disciplined, right? But you just try to, when you play, before you play a move that you want to play, think, I'm playing that move, can my opponent do something? And then play the move. And a way to train that very well is, again, in training, don't solve tactics and just play the tactic, but think, if I play this move, does my opponent, in this one, the tactic opponent or the exercise opponent, can the other side do something? When this becomes a habit, you can stop so many blunders. It's incredible.
I have to say, no, that advice about writing down your opponent's time is absolutely brilliant, because I'm also from the generation where you used to be able to write down your move before you played it, and the rules no longer allow that. And I know, like, acclaimed teachers like Elizabeth Spiegel, working with her young students, always used to tell them, write down your move before. But that's a brilliant substitute to write down, because it's really not about the move. It's not like you write it down so you remember it. It's the cue, routine, reward thing. So, the cue is you think you know what move you're going to make. The routine is when you're ready to make it, you then write down your opponent's time as like a final sort of stopping point. And the reward is you don't hang a piece.
Exactly. And so, you can also, like, I really want to stress this. I'm not on top of the current rules, but as long as I played, I was 100% sure this was completely legal. So just make sure for yourself, wherever you are, that this is allowed. If it's not allowed, you can drink a sip of water every time before you play.
Right.
You can take a bite of your banana, like whatever it is, you can just get this habit. Or if you play online, for example, you can just click on the piece, but you don't make the move yet. You click on the piece, you take your hand away from the mouse, and then you only execute. Like just find a way that works for you. Find your own blunder check. But for me, that idea from my sports psychologist who had never played chess in his own life, and he was just like, well, why don't you write down the time of your opponent? I was like, that's smart. That's a good one. Has saved me a lot of points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, compared to other weaknesses, I don't struggle as much with like just impulsive blunders, but I do record my opponent's time, since I do struggle with time trouble. But I think I'm going to incorporate it just because why not? It's one more safety check. No reason not to.
Yeah.
Unless we find out it's illegal. But.
Sure, then just. But I'm fairly sure that it's still, because there was a discussion somewhere half a year ago or something when I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and then we checked the rules, and it was like, yeah, you can write down the moves and the time, and that's it. Nothing else.
Great.
But, yeah.
Okay, so the next question goes deep into personal chess psychology, but I'm sure that we can all learn something from your answer here. So this one is from Christopher Day in the Facebook group. He says, "Hi, Noel, I have a question about control in chess and handling decisive moments in a game. A frequent experience in my chess career is the following. I'm playing a model game against a strong player of master strength. Through 25 to 35 moves, I've controlled the game, built an advantage, I sensed near winning and snuffed out counterplay. I arrive at a decisive moment, and due to the natural course of the game, both my opponent and I are relatively low on time. In this moment, I have clear candidate moves, but I'm not capable of calculating to a conclusion due to the clock. Time and again, due to fear of losing control, because I can't calculate to conclusion, I've chosen a bailout to a simplifying move, which I know to be wrong, but can't prevent myself from making when under pressure due to a desire to regain clarity over the status of the position. Of course, what often results is that I underestimate my opponent's resources, and they gain new opportunities to level or reverse the results. My question is, how do I break through this frustrating pattern? How can I train myself to embrace letting up control when necessary in order to convert winning positions when under clock pressure?
Yeah, that's a
deep.
big one. Yeah, especially because there are many factors as well. I would say there's the control factor, but there's also like, do you actually have to be in time trouble? Like you might not have to be in it.
That's
right?
what I hit on.
But yeah, let's focus on the control for a moment. So Some of you might know I have a traumatic brain injury. And actually, one of the biggest problems with traumatic brain injury is that I have an obsessive need for control because my body is scared that something happens to it again. That's basically what a trauma is, right? So I'm trying to work on that as well, just from a different perspective, just less control. And what has helped me, or what I have found out also through some books and psychologists and all the stuff I've tried out, is first step is awareness. And that seems to be there, right? You put the question already, I have too much of a need for control. Then the second step is to understand that you have a totally unachievable goal. If you always want to be in control, it won't be possible. That's same for my life as for a chess game. Like, there will be moments where things get out of control. Especially if your opponent senses it, they can make bad moves, but just that create chaos, and you'll just completely collapse, right? So we can't be always in control. I think that's important. Then we need to accept that you will make mistakes and you'll blunder sometimes and you'll lose winning positions. That's like, if you manage to do that, like I just can't prevent it. There will be mistakes, there will be blunders. Then you can freely, start to trust your intuition and say, okay, what's the worst case? Okay, worst case is I lose. I accepted that already, so let's try. And then I would say the last step would be trying maybe in your training, again, to use some more discomfort. So to use some more chaotic positions, maybe. I realized, for example, when I trained with some Indian players, they were extremely strong in chaotic positions. And I was always like, why is that? Like, it's not something that just Indians can handle chaos or whatever, but they just, in their training, if you see the Indian coaching style in general, they just give those kids hard position after hard position after chaotic position after tough position. And they're like, hey, I've solved, 5,000 of those. I'm now in a game. Why should I care? Like, I don't care. It's like king is somewhere, king is open, whatever it is. I have tried this before. But if it's the first time for you seeing a position that is a little bit out of order, and in training you usually have this controlled, nice positional stuff, then you will have a problem during the game. So that would be my long-winded answer to the control question.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's good advice. Yeah, to practice those positions in particular. And yeah, I'm sure there are like model students you can drum up, like Mikhail Tal or something, find someone's games to play through. But I do just want to drill down a little bit on what you said. Also, just like, again, speaking from personal experience and my own shortcomings, I wouldn't gloss over, I wouldn't consider it like fait accompli that you have to arrive at that moment with the amount of time that you have. I would take a hard look at your moves earlier in the game and make sure that you really needed to use all that time earlier in the game, because often in the less chaotic positions, the value of a move is not as high. It's an ongoing struggle for me, but I do try to be more conscious of that earlier in the game, of how valuable that time can be later when the position really gets loose.
Absolutely. And my coach, Grandmaster Marcus Rugger, he always set me some limit of time that I should have and never drop below, as it would be as if I lose a game. So in a classical game, let's say I would say 5 minutes and I will never go below it. Like, in my mind, I lose when I go below 5 minutes, because there will be always a moment where I shortly need to think for 3-4 minutes. And if I don't have it, I will just panic. And also, everybody is a bit different. If you have a big, demand for control, you will start to panic way earlier than somebody else. Like, I had a friend, he was playing a blitz game, and he would have 2 seconds on the clock and he would move very slowly. But every time he would hit the clock. But there was no panic. When I see 10 seconds on my clock, my brain is just fried. I can't think anymore. I can't use that 9 seconds anymore. So basically, it's like I would have 1, because my brain just stopped working. So you need to find out when is my panic mode. And then you need to be always above that panic mode threshold, because otherwise you will it's basically just flipping a coin at this point. It's like, am I finding the right move or not? I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, for sure. There comes a point where you're not thinking like, if I go there, they go there. You're thinking, I have to move. I have
exactly.
to move.
Or just knight f3, knight f3, knight f3, knight f3. I'm just like, yeah, sure, nice calculation, but it's not.
Right. All right. Next up from Brian Karen. He asks, could you delineate the advantages and disadvantages of analyzing games played by individuals with a rating margin of a few hundred points above the student, as opposed to super grandmasters? Do you believe a player with a rating of 2100 can gain more practical benefit from studying the games of an intuitively brilliant player like Carlsen compared to analyzing those of a 2400 to 2500 IM or GM? He wonders, since he spends most of his time analyzing the games of the great chess players, but perhaps it is overkill.
Yeah, my answer won't be a joy for for you. I consider watching games of great players just a joy and enjoyment, but no real training. So there is, I think it was also Marcus Rugger that said that you don't need it at all, like just completely stop doing it. Basically, the thing is that
he told you that, or he said that.
Yeah, like, also in general, I think that.
Okay.
I hope I'm not misquoting. Otherwise, sorry, Marcus. But anyway, I think also very closely along those lines, actually, that I would think that this isn't really an activity that you fully train, because you don't have how can I say this? So in training, right, you want to do with your few time to get the most out of it. So you start looking at weaknesses and you want to get the most out of it. Or you start looking at openings, you want to get the most out of it. When you just play through games, you don't know what moments come up. It's not curated. It's a little bit of everything. Maybe there is something that you find interesting. Maybe you knew that already. It's very in-specific training. And then the second problem with the great players is, in order to learn something, you don't only need to see what's good, right? So just, okay, nice, bishop d6 was the right move, but you need a way to understand why and to be able to use it yourself. And sometimes those amazing players, even if there will be notation, maybe from them, for example, they will see some moves that you don't understand as very logical. So they won't even spend time writing on that move. It would just be 5 moves in a row where they just give the moves and you're like, wait, why is that happening, right? And that moment is not a real learning moment for you, because, okay, you know that this is a good move. The engine might also tell you, but you can't replicate it if you don't understand why. Because it's not about this exact position, but it's about extracting like knowledge and general ideas. And you can't do that if the level from the player you're looking at is too far ahead of you. So that's why I would recommend, if you want to play through games, do that 200 to 300 points higher. So like that general same idea in fitness, you want to bring your muscles to 110% of what they get. So the muscle understands like, oh, I need to grow. But you can't just go to a gym and say, okay, today I'll bench press 100 pounds. And you just injure yourself. You can't even do it once, or you injure yourself. That's not useful, right? So you need to be very mindful of, how much can you actually use, and how much is just, oh my God, this is so beautiful. This player is so strong, but I won't really be able to use that in my practical games.
Yeah, it's definitely good advice. And it's funny, I happen to know Brian Karen a little bit, and as far as I know, unless this has changed, he's avid chess reader and more interested in like chess history and chess culture. So for him, I would think there's no reason to change. But I wholeheartedly agree with your general advice. It's something that Nate Solon has mentioned as well. Like if you're like a 2100 player, wants to know how to beat a 2200 player, I do think there might be unique value in like looking at a bunch of games where a 2500 beats a 2200 and really trying to sort of drill down. As opposed to trying to, understand sort of the calculation of Kasparov Topalov or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely great advice there. And I want to skip to one that ties into that. This is from Banos on Twitter asking what your thoughts on Guess the Move solitaire chess as a training tool are, which is basically where you're playing through someone's games and covering up the reply and pretending like you're playing.
Okay. I wasn't sure what solitaire chess was. I always learn. What do I think of Guess the Move? I don't really use it in my training and in the training with students. Again, I prefer training where I know that I'm really getting much out of it. And when you just take, I would say, random games, or even from a book, right? In, like, let's say 60 best games of Fischer or something like that. This book was written because the idea was these are the 60 most interesting games played by Fischer. It wasn't written to teach you something specific. So it should be interesting for everyone. It's interesting games, but for the improvement point, there are way more curated resources where you say, like, learn, I don't know, how to play this middle game, this specific structure, learn how to, do exactly that tactical exercise or whatever. So I prefer these kind of clear ways of training where you know that you'll get something out of it. While if you play through games that aren't meant just for chess improvement on your level, sometimes you'll get a hit, but most of the times you will see something interesting, but not really what you need to really improve your chess. So again, I'm all about like the best way to improve as much as possible with as little time as possible. So if you say, I don't care as much about improvement, take this always with a grain of salt. But if you want to get the most out of your little time, again, that wouldn't be something I would implement in my own training plan.
Okay. I mean, the counterpoint would be, because like Gregory Kaidanov, when I interviewed him, he's long been a proponent of solitaire chess and obviously has had a lot of successful students. I guess the counterpoint would be that these moments of like less instructive positions or boredom or navigating a dull position, like you're practicing those skills as well. Like there is some value in practicing them, but I definitely get what you're saying in that like maybe the consequences aren't as high. So there's always some push and pull.
And also, just that I clarify this, like whenever I say I wouldn't implement it, doesn't mean this is bad, right? Like, in my opinion, it's not the top of most important things, but doesn't mean that this is shit and you shouldn't listen to people that propose this, right? There's a huge difference in that. I'm really trying to go extremely deep and say what would be optimal. Like if I could try again, if I could start again, what training exactly would I do? Especially thinking about adult improvers that have very little time. So what can you do with very little time so you still see those nice improvements? But it doesn't mean, first of all, I'm not perfect. So it's not that I'm the ultimate truth or whatever. It's just stating my opinion of what I learned. And secondly, it's like, even if I were to know, then it doesn't mean that, well, something is 100% and the other is 97. As you said with the coaches, if you say this is the perfect solution, doesn't mean that all the other solutions are bad. It could be, well, I pay a fourth for this coach and I get 80%. For me, that's a win. So I'll take that, right? So that's always think about your own situation. What are your goals? What are your ideas when you get this type of advice? My advice is always steered towards people that want to get the most out of the little time they have. And then you can adjust depending on how much you really want to improve or not.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, we're all guessing at the end of the day.
Absolutely, we can be, yeah. And I think somebody that says they are not, well, there are people that have so much success with training. We talked about Jacob, for example, but I would say, even Jacob would say, like, he doesn't know, like he will realize 3 years from now that there are better ways. He will still evolve as a coach, right? So we are all trying to evolve. So there's no ultimate truth or whatever. It's just, we're trying to do our best to understand, to help our people as much as possible. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, this discussion feeds into the next question. This is from Patreon sub Tyron Ross Price. Thanks as always, Tyron. And he says, diet and exercise is the advice for weight loss that many ignore while looking for magic weight loss pills. what is the chess improvement analog to diet and exercise for weight loss? What is the, I'll stop there.
Tactics and analyzing your games. And guys, if you think, if I say this, that it was clear, then everybody knows diet and everybody knows, but you're not doing it. That's my point.
Yeah. I mean, there's 2 of the 4 pillars in my book. So no argument from me. I mean, but do you think that, so I guess since you have analyzing your game, that implies that you're playing serious games too. So
what do you mean?
Well, like you're naming 2 things, tactics and analyzing your games, but that implies that there are games to analyze.
Yeah, sure.
There are some people who only read books, you know, and never.
Yeah. Let's say tactics and playing and analyzing games. But there's like a there's a little percentage of people that are also scared sometimes to play games, so they won't even play.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And that's sad. That's sad to see. I just want to say if you out there are scared of playing chess games, like nobody cares about your rating, you know? You'll be the same great human being you are right now. And just 100 terrible. You know, if you're a prick, you're a prick, you know? It's just you can be a 2700, you can be a former world champion. I'm not naming names, but if you're crazy, you're crazy. It doesn't matter how good you are. So you know, think about your as a human being, the people who love you, whatever. That won't change if you win or lose a chess game. So just try to enjoy the improvement journey and don't put so much weight on winning or losing.
Okay. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. And I know it's, especially when it comes to tournaments, there's a lot of people who feel like I'm not ready, but you're never going to feel ready. So you just gotta dive in the pool. Okay, next question from Powell Ignac. I hope I said that right, Powell, via Patreon. Thanks, Powell, for helping to support Perpetual Chess. He asks how to evaluate one's improvement. Of course, rating seems like the most obvious way to do it, but what may be other ways? A lot of adult improvers don't participate in tournaments, but play mostly online or with some regular partners. What's more, they may quickly hit the point where it's really hard to seriously gain rating points. So other ways to evaluate your chess game.
So I like to track the training. So write down what you did. So for example, if you read a book, if you solve puzzles and you realize, well, I've done always 4 out of 8 correctly, and now I'm doing 6 out of 8 consistently, probably something has gone the right way, right? So if you track not only what exactly you're doing, but how many solutions do you get, you can get a good feeling of, am I improving in that part of my chess? Then a second thing we've already talked about is like, is this still my biggest mistake? Or like, am I making different mistakes? If you're all the time making the same mistakes, probably something is not good. But if you start making new mistakes and you're like, oh, I actually don't understand that mistake, right? It's like, you see the engine screaming at you, that's wrong. It's not really a blunder, but you're not like, why is that even a bad move? That's a good sign, because now you've improved. You will always make mistakes, but if you don't really fully understand them immediately, means that you get better, you do the stuff that you know already, and you get to new levels where you have new barriers. So that would be 2 ways of understanding if you're improving. And then like the third thing, I would really just say, if you have some type of plan, right? You follow some advice that sounds good and you keep doing that plan consistently, you can be quite sure that you'll improve at some point. Obviously, that depends on the quality of your plan, but I think it's so important. Nowadays, there are so many advice out there, right? Everybody can give their opinion. Again, we are also just stating our opinion, but there are some people that think about this the whole day, and there are some people that just see a question and they just write something. They don't even mean it badly, but there's so much advice you can get. If you always shift every 5 days, you will never understand if you're doing things right or wrong, or you're basically always treading water, right? So try to stick to something you believe in, to some good, sound advice, give it time, and then you should get better. If then after 3 months, 6 months, you're like, oh, I did it, I was really consistent and I'm never improving, and my tactic skills is always the same, my online tactic rating is always the same, and so on, then maybe it's time to change something. But give it also some time. That's important.
Yeah. Excellent advice as usual. Next up from Jeff Anderson via Patreon, he said, Noel, you've said that reading is the single most powerful thing that you can do. So what is your favorite chess book on playing the middle game?
I always forget. It's about structures. I think I've mentioned it maybe already here. How is that called?
Ruiz, Chess Structures?
Yes, I think it's just called Chess Structures. Yeah, I do love that book.
Yeah, it is.
That's
it's
one
amazing.
of the few chess books I'm like, I would have loved to write that myself.
Yeah, he's got a new book coming out this year. I can't wait.
That's interesting. I really like the simplicity of it, the structure of it. It's not a book you read from start to finish. You want to pick what structures you have, and then you go into those. But I've read it. I think I was an IM already, and I found it very interesting. And I've shared it with students, and I've used it for some lessons, and it's just very good stuff.
Yeah, it's a great book for sure. Okay. Next question. Here's another sort of classic question. I discussed it in my book some. This one's from Sir Rooksy on Twitter. He asks, my question concerns the relative benefit of working through several thousand high-quality tactical position endgame puzzles, Woodpecker style. Will drilling these types of puzzles to the point of memorization significantly improve chess ability? So repeating puzzles as opposed to solving new ones. Where do you come down?
I would go more on the solving new ones. But some repetition I do like. But I think when you do it to the point of memorization, it can really get very dry, and you get minimal improvement out of the later sets, I would say. While doing something, you might have a bigger margin of improvement. So that's where I'm at the moment. So also in my course, Next Level Training, I'm not recommending. I actually like the book, Woodpecker Method.
Yeah, same here.
But I don't recommend to do it exactly as they say.
You said what I said in my book a lot more succinctly.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree, and I do think I like that. I like the exercises in the book.
Yeah.
It's like you say. It's just I don't think the method is strictly necessary. Next question from David Tietz on Twitter. He asks, given that chess improvement is a perpetual endeavor, what would you recommend to help avoid burnout, especially during plateaus?
Yeah, that's an important one. Actually, a bit of background on this. During my active career, I've been stressed, I've been close to burnout several times. And I felt it was a thing just for professional players, right? Because we have these expectations, we have to make a living and all these things. And I've realized there's so many amateurs that are close or at chess burnout, right? So It is a real thing. It is something that has probably to do with expectations. It has something to do with the amount of value we give to our chess rating, even for non-professional players. I've talked about, for example, people having their rating in their profiles, social profiles, like I'm a 1657 rated player, where you just link your identity to your rating, and that makes it dangerous. So how to avoid burnout? I would lower your expectations. I would do only 80% of training that you think you can do in a week. So at all times, just do what you think you can for sure do and a little bit less. This helps because usually we think that we have more time than we have. We don't think of all the daily stressors, problems that we have, and the week goes so quickly, and then we think, oh, I didn't do it again, or we just do too much. We overfill ourselves with chess. So that's something I would recommend. I think there is a Japanese word for it, but I don't know it. They have this idea in eating, actually. So they just eat 80% of feeling full, And that's one of the reasons why they are in general more slim, more healthy, because they are not going to what they perceive as 100%, but stopping at 80%. And I like that a lot. Part of that would be also always take a day off. I'm very strict in that. My chess training planner has 6 days you can plan. There is no 7th day. So just make sure to take that day off, because yes, in a single week, you might feel the motivation to do the 7th day. You might squeeze a little bit more out, but taking the day off helps you regenerate, helps you get motivated again for the next session, helps you just also sometimes when on a Thursday and I knew Saturday, Sunday was off, I usually took 2 days off chess. I pushed myself harder during the training because I knew, okay, Saturday I can relax. If I don't see an end, there's just like, this is so annoying, right? But if I see like the horizon, I was saying, okay, yeah, there is an end to that, then I can push myself also harder. Then the rating point is very important. Don't try to not identify with the rating that you have. You are the person you are and not the rating. The rating doesn't define you, especially for amateurs that, hey, you don't need to win any game, right? You're not winning money. You're just like, chess is a losing financial hobby in a way, right? You just spend money. So just accept that you're not going to make a fortune. Well, also as a professional player, you're not making a fortune, but just accept like you don't need to have good results. So don't expect them and don't feel like they are so important. And the last one might be a little bit interesting for some, but don't celebrate rating gains too much. Because if you celebrate when you win, it means you will feel horrible when you lose. So try to celebrate when you learn stuff. Try to celebrate when you had a fun game, an interesting game, when you felt good at the board, when you focused. But when you just celebrate, when you gain rating, when the results are good, you will feel shit when you lose. Yeah,
well said. I've certainly been there. All right, last improvement question, and then we'll dig into your course a bit. And also, this one is from Erbold Enkbold, and he asks, if you're unable to practice OTB, if you can't make it to your local club, what's the best time control to practice online?
It's very hard to say a generic advice again. As we'll talk about the beginner course soon for beginners, I recommend 10 plus 5 is really like the quickest I recommend, and then higher up. I like 15 plus 10, for example. You really have time to think through some moves, some moments, but you don't have to spend an hour or two for one single game. But it really depends on what you want. Like, do you want something close to OTB? Then you can play longer games online, right? You can, but in general, the stronger you get, the shorter you can make the game and still take something away from it. So the shortest I've played as a training was 3 minutes. But if you're not so experienced yet, try to play 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then try to see how do you feel during the game? How is the quality of your moves? How do you enjoy? And then find the one that is optimal for you.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. In my book, I said that if you're using Blitz as like a training tool, I put the level where it can start. I don't even remember the exact level I said in the book, but I think I put it around 1600, where you can start to play 5-minute chess and not feel like it's strictly for fun. Do you agree with that general?
Yeah, I would probably put it even a bit higher up if we're talking about online chess. But yeah, that's certainly like, it's really hard. So some people, they see Firouzja playing bullet marathons, right? And they say, but he is so good. He plays so much bullet. Like, maybe I should play bullet so I get better, right? First of all, it's not always. It can be despite playing bullet that he is so great and not because of.
Right.
And then the second point is really, as a Grandmaster, we have this ability that when I play a Blitz game, I basically immediately know what went wrong because I have this experience. But as a lesser experienced player, you don't know that. Or you don't have that like, oh, that's where things went wrong. And Blitz has an addictive flavor to it as well. So you'll probably not analyze all the games. And when you make a lot of mistakes, you don't know when you go wrong and you don't analyze your mistakes. That's when disaster starts slowly creeping up on you. So yeah, not recommended.
All right. Well said. Yeah. And yeah, it can be fun, but yeah, you need to know your objective, as with everything you do in chess. All right, so the course is called Beginner Chess Mastery. So Noel was nice enough to send me an advanced copy, and I checked it out. It's 12 hours, tons of content for those of you new to chess. So I actually, because I'm not a beginner, I didn't watch it start to finish, but I did enjoy it. And I watched, as I was telling Noel before we recorded, I watched his previous course, which is quite good as well for the more intermediate to advanced players that are listening. But no, why don't we start by just why did you decide to do a beginner course?
So I had this course out, which was about how to train, right? Next level training is about how to train, and from the levels of beginner to 2000. That was like the rating range. And I started having more players below 1200 in that course. And I have a lot of suggestions, recommended resources that people can study. And for that level, I really struggled to find resources I was really enjoying to recommend them. I started researching some, I started recommending some, and players came back and said, that's too difficult. I don't understand that. That's strange. And I just couldn't find a beginner or a few beginner things that I said, okay, this is a hell yeah from my side. I really love to recommend that. So at some point I decided, okay, I just do it myself. So I ended up doing it just as a way of saying, okay, I have a lot of people asking me this stuff. I don't find what I would love to see. So let's do it myself.
And this is something I recently interviewed Grandmaster Josh Friedel, who did a beginner-oriented course, more specific than yours, not as yours is kind of like meant to be a comprehensive walkthrough, whereas his was just on common beginner mistakes. But I was impressed with both Josh's and your ability to kind of forget all the stuff which is not easy to do. So how did you do that? How were you able to sort of start from ground zero and teach, even how the pieces move, and obviously getting to more advanced concepts from there?
I think for me, it was like curiosity, really about understanding. It's really learning a new way of teaching, because I hadn't done it before. Then I started doing one-on-one training. So that was a big part for me of really like just seeing the reaction of somebody when you say something that you find is very logical. And he's just looking at you and you realize, okay, he's not with me anymore. Somewhere right in that sentence was something that wasn't in his vocabulary. So that was just, it was an interesting process, but I've just tried to focus like what does this person need to know? And then, as you say, maybe just not mention a lot of other things that I could mention, but I just know that's probably going to confuse them more than it helps them. So that was certainly one of the biggest difficulties, but I've also enjoyed looking at chess a little bit differently once again and saying like, all the things I know as a grandmaster, how can I put them into logical ways and just into words instead of moves sometimes, right? Just like an idea, which side are you playing on? You play on the side where you have more pieces in general, right? And not saying like, no, there is a double pawn and the weakness, and you don't want to get too deep, right? You want to just have these general topics that help a beginner go through the game and have a slight idea of where am I moving my pieces? What am I doing next? What is my idea? So I found it very interesting, actually.
And also, you touched on this, but just so that there's no confusion for people listening. So what rating would you say, like what rating range would you say should definitely check out this course? And by the way, there's a money back guarantee if someone checks it out and doesn't like it. And Noel also graciously offered to do an affiliate deal here with Perpetual Chess. So if you purchase it through Perpetual Chess, you can help support the pod if you use a link in the show description. But again, if you don't like it, you can send it back and up to 2 weeks. But in any event, who's the target audience specifically rating wise?
Target audience is beginner up to 1200chess.com. That was my general idea. So again, with beginners, I focus more on rapid than blitz or bullet or whatever rating. So that was my general person that I thought about was either somebody coming completely new to chess, right? So if you have a friend, a family member, whatever, you say, hey, I start out chess. You can do that in with this course. You will learn the rules and then go to the things. But if you're somewhere along that way, you will also find a lot of things. And by the way, you can just skip the rule section. You will find a lot of things that will help you get to 1200 online. So the premise of the course is there's everything you need inside this course, knowledge-wise, to take you to 1200. Obviously, you'll need to do some tactics on your own. I can't put those in your brain. So, but knowledge-wise, there's everything you need to know in that course.
Okay, and no, you mentioned a few minutes ago, like part of the reason you made this course was you felt like you weren't that, like there was nothing that grabbed you as like the perfect recommendation. So what would you say, like what shortcomings did you notice in the stuff that was already available?
So I really like well-structured things. So this rundown of all-in-one, I'm a beginner, I want one course that teaches me not only the tactics, but also the strategy, how to think during a chess game, some opening principles, like just all the stuff. That's something I didn't see as often. Then I felt that sometimes there was too much information involved. So I'm also a big fan of simplicity, right? So I don't think mating with bishop and knight is anywhere close to being a beginner course. I don't think that a lot of opening theory needs to be in a beginner course. So for example, there is a bonus section where you can get an opening repertoire specifically for beginners that you'll get with the course, but that's not part of the main course. So if you don't want to learn a lot of opening, like it's actually not a lot, but some opening theory, you don't have to. So that was one thing. And then the third thing I felt was that mostly concepts were described, but they weren't explained to the point where the beginner can understand the why. So for example, I've seen recently, I've watched a coaching session of a friend of mine with a beginner, and this beginner player was rated around, I think, 1000 online. And they said, oh yeah, I can go into the opposition in the end game. Let's do that. And it was a rook end game, and they went into the opposition, and it was checkmate in one for the opponent, right? So they understood opposition is something good in general in the end game, but had no clue why. Like, it's not because of that, right? It's not when you're the defending side in a rook end game. So I tried to just take principles that you hear and things that are thrown around in the chess world often, and try to get to the ground of it and say, okay, here's what opposition really does. It allows you to force the opponent, usually in zugzwang, and then to bring your king to a key square, right? So if you can't achieve that with an opposition, think twice about opposition, because maybe that's not the thing, or it's good for checkmating, but it's not good for defending against the checkmate. So that kind of thing, I've tried to make it really understandable so that people have a vocabulary, but really understand why that vocabulary makes sense. And they don't just have like some parts of knowledge, like my knight should go to f3. Why should it go to f3 in the opening? Or like all these kind of things that most people hear, but I don't know why it really matters.
Okay. Yeah, and Noel, for your first course, I know you were sort of doing some things to facilitate community, like Q&A drawings, and I believe a Discord. Are you doing any of that stuff for this one?
This one will be a little bit different because it's priced way lower than the first one, right? It will be at the launch, it will be at $60, and then it will go back up to $100. So it won't have that community setting included, but you'll get lifetime access to it, and as mentioned, just a much more affordable price, just to help people that are rather new to chess to get into it and to get that yeah, that feeling, that instruction, and then hopefully the rating gains, as well as more like the feeling of, oh, I understand actually what people are talking about when I read a book or when I listen to a podcast or to a YouTube video or whatever.
Okay, great. Yeah, and for people listening, so this pod should come out the day that Noel's courses come out. We'll see both of our abilities to deliver on our expected date, but usually we're both pretty good in that regard. And then it'll be, as you said, on sale from 100 down to 60 for 5 days. Is that right?
It should be. So Tuesday we want to publish, both of us, right? And then until Sunday night, you'll be able to get it at a discount.
Okay, great. And yeah, again, for longtime listeners, do want to be clear that this particular course is more beginner oriented. But as Noel said, like, this will always be available. So anytime you meet someone new to chess, it's, everything that Noel does is insightful, and he puts in a lot of work. So yeah, definitely recommend it. We'll use a link for anyone who wants to check it out. Noel, anything else? We were scared this one might go 2 hours, but I think we might wrap up in about 90 minutes, unless there's any other burning chess topics you would like to address.
No. Let's not get in chess politics or something like that. I'm not good on this. No, thanks for having me. It's great to see what you're doing. Great to see that you have published a book since we last talked.
Yeah, amazing.
Quite a big thing, right? It's like, just for guys outside, like publishing a book or doing a course, you always think it's manageable, but the amount of work that gets to you, it's like, I think I've heard Tim Ferriss say, when you're 90% through, congratulations, you have 50% to go. So that's
right.
That's just for people to understand also. Thank you so much, Ben, for what you're doing for the chess world and how much time you put into your projects, because I know how much time it can take. So thanks.
Likewise. Thank you, Noel. And again, remind listeners to make sure you're subscribed to Noel's blog. You'll get an email every Friday, as you will from me when you subscribe to my blog. And yeah, that should wrap things up. So good to catch up, Noel. Good luck with the course launch, and hope to catch you when you're traveling in the United States.
Yeah, let's try.